The ocean does not chase the shore. It simply recedes, and in the silence it leaves behind, the shore finally understands what it had been taking for granted. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible from the outside, when the super empath stops. Not dramatically, not with announcement or ultimatum or the kind of emotional confrontation the avoidant has spent years bracing for and expertly deflecting. They simply stop extending, stop reaching into the distance between them and the avoidant and trying to close it through the sheer force of their emotional generosity. Something inside them finishes. Not breaks, finishes. The way a sentence finishes, complete. And in that completion, everything in the dynamic shifts in a way the avoidant is entirely unprepared for. This is the moment the avoidant's world quietly begins to destabilize. To understand why the avoidant cannot handle this particular detachment, the nature of the super empath needs to be understood first, because their detachment is not the same as the avoidant's detachment, and the difference between the two is everything. The avoidant detaches from fear, from self-protection, from a nervous system that learned, long before they had the language to understand it, that closeness was a precursor to pain. Their distance is a wound wearing the mask of indifference. It is reactive, rooted in anxiety, and underneath it, perpetually unstable, maintained only through constant, exhausting vigilance against the pull of genuine connection. The super empath detaches from wholeness, from a place of such thorough self-knowledge and self-sufficiency that the withdrawal of their presence is not a performance of strength, but an honest expression of it. They do not detach to punish. They do not create distance to provoke a reaction or recalibrate a dynamic. They detach because they have finally, fully accepted what is, and what is no longer serves the deepest truth of who they are. It is the calmest, most devastating thing one person can do to another. And the avoidant, who has made an art form of detachment their entire life, suddenly finds themselves on the other side of it. And they do not have the tools. The avoidant has never needed tools for this. In every previous dynamic, they were the one who held the emotional distance as a kind of currency, the one whose unavailability created the longing, whose withdrawal generated the pursuit, whose half-presence kept the other person perpetually oriented toward them, like a compass needle toward north. The architecture of their relationships was built around this invisible asymmetry. And it did not require cruelty. It did not require intention. It simply required that the other person cared more visibly than they did. The super empath, in the early chapters of the dynamic, appeared to fit this architecture. Their sensitivity, their depth of feeling, their instinct toward emotional generosity, it all looked, from the outside, like the familiar pattern, someone who would stay. Someone who would absorb the avoidance distance and return it as patience. Someone whose emotional investment would quietly, reliably anchor the avoidance freedom to remain half in without consequence. But the super empath was never what they appeared to be inside that architecture. They were never anchored by need. They were present by choice. And choice, unlike need, has an endpoint. When the detachment arrives, the avoidance nervous system registers something it genuinely does not have a category for. Absence where there was once warmth. Stillness where there was once pursuit. A presence that has not left the room, but has somehow undeniably left the reach of them. And the avoidant, who has spent their entire relational life being the one who is harder to hold, harder to keep, harder to fully have, suddenly understands at a visceral level what it means to be on the outside of someone's interior world. It is disorienting in a way that ordinary rejection never is. Ordinary rejection the avoidant can metabolize. It confirms the narrative they have carried since childhood, that closeness ends in loss, that vulnerability leads to abandonment, that they were right to keep their distance all along. Rejection, paradoxically, is almost a relief. It closes the question. It makes the fear make sense. But the super empath's detachment does not look like rejection. It looks like resolution. The super empath does not leave in pain, or if they do, the pain does not make them smaller. They leave in the direction of themselves. And there is a completeness to it, a dignity to it, that the avoidant cannot dismiss or reframe or absorb into their existing narrative. It does not confirm their fear. It confounds it. What surfaces in the avoidant, in the wake of this detachment, is something they rarely allow themselves to feel, want. Not the abstract, safely distant awareness that someone is appealing, but a genuine, uncomfortable, present tense want. The desire for a specific person's specific presence, now that the presence is no longer available. And the cruelty of this, the particular emotional irony, is that the very qualities that make the super empath's detachment so complete are the qualities that make them irreplaceable. The groundedness, the self-possession, the fact that they loved without losing themselves and left without losing their dignity. The avoidant cannot replicate this with someone else, cannot find it by moving on, cannot dissolve it through distraction or the pursuit of someone new. It lives in them as a specific ache for a specific person, and that specificity is something the avoidant, who has always prided themselves on their self-sufficiency, does not know how to carry. They were prepared for many things, for arguments, for ultimatums, for tears and pleading, and the kind of emotional intensity they had always known how to step away from. What they were never prepared for was someone who simply became the stillest, most complete version of themselves and walked not away from the avoidant, but toward their own life. That kind of departure does not create a memory. It creates a standard, and everything that comes after it will quietly, permanently fall short.